When I came across what remained of my grandfather, he did not look like a man who had found his way any closer to God. His skin creaked like old branches in the wind, and if not for the faint, pitiful sound he made in response to my flashlight, I might not have even realized what I was looking at. I had only met him once before that. I must have been about 10. Some stranger had shown up out of nowhere, calling himself my grandfather, and I had no clue what to make of him. For a man who genuinely believed that cavemen rode dinosaurs, Elijah was not as bizarre as you might expect. A few years later, when I was 13, he managed to track us down and flew all the way to Britain to see us. My father had never spoken about his biological dad, and though the old man seemed to regret the lost years, he was not the kind to dwell on it. He was polite but detached, and after 2 days, he and my father parted ways for good. At least, they never spoke in person again. As he was leaving, he casually invited us to visit him in Texas someday, but that never came to pass. My strongest memory of him was the night he sat me down and flipped through my math textbook with me. He explained imaginary numbers and string theory in a way that made it all seem almost simple, his passion for the subject shining through. Only later did my father tell me that Elijah was a devout young Earth creationist. He believed the planet was no older than 6,000 years and that every word of the Bible was absolute truth. Fast forward 28 years, and I found myself standing in the entrance of a museum that Elijah had privately owned, a museum that, as I had only recently discovered, was now legally mine after my father's passing. He had never spoken a word about it, nor had he ever mentioned that Elijah was dead. Sorting through my father's estate had led me to this unexpected inheritance, 60 acres of land on the other side of the world. The museum was dedicated to what Elijah had called biblical science, a grand attempt to prove the divine origins of creation. Stone slabs were displayed like sacred relics, showing what were claimed to be human footprints, some absurdly large, with plaques declaring them as evidence that mankind had once walked alongside dinosaurs. There was an entire jungle-themed room featuring plastic caveman versions of Adam and Eve crouched beside a makeshift fire, while across from them, a poorly constructed stegosaurus looked on his cane shoved Abel to the ground. The most ridiculous of all was a scene where 2 primitive men harvested wheat using raptor claws as makeshift sickles. It was, if nothing else, creative. But convincing? Not in the slightest. What puzzled me most was how a man like Elijah had become so obsessed with creationism in the first place. He had started his life as an academic, earning a PhD in mathematics and even spending a brief period teaching at a local college. I spent weeks in that museum, not just sorting through his belongings, but trying to piece together the puzzle of who he really was. In the process, I uncovered 3 key things. First, Elijah had been a man at war with his own allies. He argued incessantly with every other creationist he encountered, burning bridges left and right. Without their support, his museum had barely seen a handful of visitors in the 3 decades it had been open. Second, I found an old newspaper clipping on his desk, featuring a photo of him proudly grinning next to a dinosaur footprint. The article detailed how he had once gotten lost in the wilderness and taken shelter in a cave filled with fossils. The land in the photo was the very place he had later built his museum, so clearly, it had meant something profound to him. Yet in all my time wandering the property, I had not stumbled upon any cave. I figured if I kept searching, I would find it eventually. The final discovery was a letter addressed to my grandmother. I had never known that he had reached out to her. The only thing my family ever knew was that she had a brief affair with an American soldier and wanted nothing more to do with him. The letter was, of all things, a marriage proposal. At first, I could not understand why she had ignored it. Elijah had been wealthy, highly educated, ambitious, and judging by old photographs, a strikingly handsome man in his youth. But then I reached the final pages, and everything fell into place. Ethel, I can offer you more than just a comfortable life. I can offer you an eternal one. I am sure I have told you about the time I was injured while hiking in the wilderness and had to take refuge in a cave until the storm passed. It was there that I found not only strange and marvelous fossils but something far greater. Something I have not spoken of to anyone else. Ethel, I found a way down. Down into the depths of the earth, where time has stood still since the days before the Great Flood. There, I beheld a world untouched by sin, a paradise that had been preserved since Eden. I saw men as they were meant to be, towering 10 feet tall, their lifespan stretching across 1,000 years, speaking the language that God himself had gifted before the fall of Babel. One of these ancient beings sat me down and revealed to me the true history of our world. I have carried this secret alone for far too long. But I know now that I can change everything. It begins with the book I am writing, and then the museum to present the evidence I have gathered. This is not just about understanding our past, Ethel, it is about securing our future. In that place beneath the earth, I learned how to end war, to stop suffering, to banish hunger and want from the world. I believe it is God's will that I see this mission through. Ethel, I want you beside me when I do. There it is, I muttered under my breath, my fingers tightening around the old, yellowed pages as I sat by the dim glow of Elijah's worn-out desk lamp. That was why my grandmother had ignored his letters, why my father never knew his own father until the old man tracked him down years later. 6 weeks of sifting through the dust-laden remnants of Elijah's forgotten museum, and finally, I felt like I understood him. Smart. Stubborn. Maybe even unhinged. As the days passed and I continued sorting through his things, I found myself feeling a strange kind of sympathy for him. That place had an unbearable loneliness to it, and the thought of an aging man meticulously painting little plaques no one would ever read, or carefully planning restroom facilities for non-existent field trips, it unsettled me. And yet, he never gave up. Right until the very end. The whole building felt like a shrine to one man's delusions. Then I found the hidden door behind the bookcase, and I realized Elijah had built not one museum, but 2. The uneasy feeling I had since setting foot in that place finally made sense. I had brushed it off, assuming it was just the weight of packing up a dead man's life, but the moment I found that hidden latch in the bookshelf creaked open, releasing a breath of stale, unmoving air, I understood I had been sensing something else entirely. It was the darkness that struck me first. Or maybe the smell. Hard to say, since I had never inhaled air like that before or since. Even now, I wonder if I am exaggerating just how deep and absolute the blackness was at the bottom of those stairs. But in that moment, it triggered something primal inside me. Every nerve screamed at me to turn and leave. Not just the building, but Texas, the entire country. Run straight to the airport and never look back. I had no idea what lay below, but every fiber of my being warned me that I did not want to find out. It's just the dark, I whispered to myself, swallowing the lump in my throat as I forced one foot forward, then another. The descent wasn't far, but the smooth plaster walls gave way to rough, ancient rock, confirming what I suspected. The cave Elijah had spoken of wasn't missing. It had been right beneath my feet the whole time. And there, in a cavernous space large enough to swallow a school gymnasium, I found an entirely different set of exhibits. 8 massive glass tanks stood in a row, each larger than a car. The air was thick with the chemical stench of formaldehyde, turning the murky liquid inside them a sickly, greenish hue. My flashlight flickered across the tanks, revealing only shadowy forms lurking within. Whatever Elijah had planned for this hidden display, it was no collection of ancient fossils. There was flesh inside those tanks. Bone. Muscle, exposed, glistening, writhing as though time itself had failed to claim it. My pulse hammered as I moved from one case to the next, scanning their depths with increasing dread. My movements were quick and jerky, each reveal more unsettling than the last. And then, in the beam of my flashlight, a massive, unblinking eye stared back at me. I stumbled backward, a strangled cry catching in my throat. The eye was housed in a sunken socket of rotting flesh, its color alien, its shape unfamiliar. I could not tell if it had once belonged to something that slithered, swam, or flew. As I moved around the case, my light fell on a hand curled up in the corner of the tank, fingers long, uneven, unnatural. What the hell had Elijah been planning down here? There were no information plaques, no explanations. Just those enormous tanks, perfectly arranged as though waiting for an audience that never arrived. The floor was covered in marble, suggesting that Elijah had once envisioned something grand, something important. But time had abandoned the room to dust and decay, leaving only those silent, submerged things behind. Upstairs, the exhibits had been laughable, a crude attempt at forcing belief through cheap tricks and flimsy evidence. But down here, something real pressed against the edges of my understanding, and it sent a slow, cold panic creeping through my chest. I left after only 10 minutes, fleeing back to the surface where I sat beneath the sweltering Texas sun, hoping its warmth could burn away the filth that clung to me. I nearly booked a flight home that afternoon. Nearly. But I could not shake the feeling that, for all his madness, Elijah had found something down there. Something more compelling than staged footprints and plastic dinosaurs. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to push the images of those shadowy forms from my mind. Sleep refused to come, and I was still wide awake when I heard the sound of movement below. I froze. I was alone. The nearest town was miles away. The sheriff had warned me about squatters, had urged me to find a hotel, and for the first time, I regretted not taking his advice. Logic told me it was a drifter, some desperate soul looking for shelter. That made sense. And yet, I could not shake the gnawing dread creeping up my spine. Despite every rational thought telling me to stay put, I got up. The idea of spending the entire night barricaded in my room, listening to the unknown shuffle through the dark, was worse than facing it head-on. I needed to know. And deep down, I suspected it was not just human trespassers I feared. Moving cautiously through the museum, I swept my flashlight across the exhibits, noting the same stacked boxes and dismantled displays I had been sorting for weeks. In the jungle room, the eerie mannequins of cavemen and dinosaurs stood frozen in their absurd dioramas, shadows dancing over their crude features. I paused before a particularly unsettling display, the serpent offering an apple, its strange, childlike face molded from fiberglass, beady yellow eyes staring blankly ahead. I had disliked it from the moment I arrived, and now, under the moonlight, it seemed even worse. For some reason, I found myself rereading the plaque below it. I had dismissed Elijah's words before. But in that moment, something made me stop and take another look. Creatures alive today, like snakes and lizards, would have looked vastly different under the conditions of the pre-flood world, where the air crackled with static and the water didn't fall from the sky, but rather seeped upward from the earth in a kind of condensation. The serpent, for instance, might not have been like anything we recognize today, but rather a completely different kind of creature, whose bones have confounded non-believing scientists for years. Only by turning to the Bible can we begin to understand the true significance of such fossils. This, Elijah wrote, was his interpretation of what the serpent that tempted Eve may have looked like. I let my eyes linger on the plaque, a sense of creeping dread settling in my chest, when something caught my attention. Slowly, I looked up, and there they were, eyes, watching me from over the mannequin's shoulder. I couldn't make out the face behind the fake plants, but the eyes were unmistakable. Reflective yellow, gleaming like they were made of glass, fixed on me for a moment. Then they blinked, one after the other. I froze, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. The primitive terror that surged through me was something I couldn't ignore. A pair of predatory eyes, staring at me from the dark. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as they slinked away, retreating into the shadows, swallowed whole by the dark. Then I heard it, the rapid, wet footfalls, scaring across the tile floor as something moved quietly through the room, vanishing into the darkness. That night, I barricaded my bedroom door, my mind too disturbed to sleep. In the morning, when the daylight finally offered some comfort, I went to check the jungle room. Wet, slimy tracks led into Elijah's office, vanishing behind the bookcase, exactly where I had found that hidden door leading down to the cave. It was insane. All of it. Madness, I told myself, but as much as I wanted to dismiss it, my curiosity gnawed at me. If you were in my shoes, you wouldn't have been able to let it go either. It was like seeing the ice wall in the Arctic, proof of some twisted, conspiratorial nonsense peddled by madmen, the kind of stuff you hear from YouTubers talking about flat earths and giants buried under pyramids. But when I stood down there in that room, it was as if I could feel it, the air, crackling with static, the ground underfoot different somehow, as if I had stepped into some older world. And as much as I hated to even entertain Elijah's beliefs, there was no denying that I had experienced something real. Something beyond the world as I knew it. I had to understand it. For weeks, I'd been packing up nothing but badly made forgeries, footprints with visible tool marks, dinosaur bones rearranged to fit the narrative of creationism, ridiculous dioramas of raptors on Noah's Arkansas. Elijah had certainly found something, but I was sure it wasn't the proof of his beliefs. I just had to make sense of it, my way. Despite my growing anxiety, I forced myself back down the stairs, this time carrying a crowbar and a claw hammer tucked into my belt loop, just in case. I brought a few wired floodlights and set them up, determined to get a better look. But when I flipped the lights on, the sight didn't get any clearer. If anything, the harsh light scattered across the filthy tanks, and it was worse than before, a pale green jelly, floating like something out of a nightmare. But then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. 2 doors, one wooden and one a thick metal bulkhead, like the kind on a ship, designed to seal off flooded hallways. I knew that metal door was where I was headed. But for now, I turned to Elijah's journals. I started flipping through the pages, reading his notes on his failed experiments. Specimen 1, rat. Failure. Died after only a few hours. Preserved for future study. Specimen 2, sheep. Partial failure. The wool grows at an unusual pace. Small buds. Flowers. We'll see. Preserved for future study. Specimen 3, cow. Failure. If size is any indication, the ark must have been colossal. Perhaps these creatures are the origins of woolly mammoths. Dissection attempted, but proved too difficult. Preserved for future study. Specimen 4, spider. Success. A truly prehistoric creature. It returned to its aquatic roots and survived for many days in the tank before dying during an escape attempt. Preserved for future study. Specimen 5, lizard. Success. Primitive attempts at speech were promising. Euthanasia was difficult but ultimately necessary. Its speech was not permitted in a God-fearing society. Preserved for future study. Specimen 6, cactus houseplant. Success. Appearance unchanged, but dissection revealed meat-like insides. Continues to grow despite all attempts to halt it. Must monitor its display closely. Specimen 7, blue catfish. Success. The origins of the great Leviathan perhaps lie within creatures such as this. Its growth was extraordinary and will be a challenge to fit it into one of the displays. Ancient sailors must have trembled before it. Specimen 8, sparrow. Failure. Dreadful mistake. Euthanized itself while screaming blasphemous obscenities. Preserved for further study. Specimen 9, exposure to pre-flood conditions has begun to affect me. I will have to join the great men below, if they will have me. My work will cease, but I will find solace knowing this will bring me closer to God. I looked over the tanks again, the chill creeping down my spine. Were these Elijah's failed experiments? And if so, what had he been doing to them? There were no scientific tools in that cave. No bubbling vials or buzzing Tesla coils. But those eyes, that eye. It couldn't have come from any of those specimens. Whatever he had been working on, it had gone far beyond his notes. Mutation? Radiation? I couldn't stop the question from lingering. But before I could consider the next steps, I heard a sound, faint, almost a whisper, but distinct. A susurration, soft and almost imperceptible, coming from the other side of the metal door. Jacob. It was barely a whisper, but it felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The name hung in the air, pulling me closer to that door. There was no turning back now. Open the door. It wasn't a sound. Not in any way I could comprehend. I couldn't tell you the timbre of the voice, its volume, or even the language. It wasn't those things. It was inside me, in me, and it felt like a violent shock to my mind. A hammer swung to my cortex, leaving my thoughts ringing with a kind of dull roar. My vision warped, like a slideshow flickering too fast. Blood sprayed from my nose and mouth, splattering onto the cold floor beneath me. The ground was suddenly too close, just inches away, and my hands, slick with panic, reached for the locking wheel. I forced myself to my feet, every movement like wading through a heavy fog. My fingers locked around the wheel with a desperation that I couldn't fight. I had to open it, even as my mind finally caught up, filling with a gut-clenching panic. A feral, primal need to flee surged through me, but something stronger pushed me forward. I couldn't stop. I couldn't resist. It was as if my own body betrayed me. Resisting was as impossible as flying or walking on the ceiling. The loss of control was maddening, a horror so deep it left me breathless. But before I could unlock that door, something broke the hold over me. A sound, splashes of water behind me. For some reason, that simple sound shattered the paralysis. My senses slowly returned, though I still felt a strange pulse radiating from the door, a force that seemed to wrap itself around me, threatening to tear me apart. I turned, and the light from my torch caught a glimmer in the shadows. A writhing mass, black and oily, slithering inside one of the tanks. That alone froze my blood in my veins. But it wasn't enough to make me forget that force beyond the door. I could still feel it, pressing in on me from the other side. A white-hot aura of domination, more suffocating than the thickest fog. The terror it radiated threatened to unravel me, to break me down to nothing. I had never known fear like that. I almost felt like a beaten child, mewling for mercy. Before that thing could speak again, I ran. I didn't look back. I screamed as I tore through the hallway, down the stairs, and out into the open air. The moment I hit the sunlight, my body gave up. The shock hit my nervous system like a freight train, and I blacked out. When I woke, my mouth was sticky with dried blood, and the sun had burned my skin on one side. A heavy boot nudged my ribs gently. "You okay down there?" A voice. I looked up. It was Officer Wheeler, the same man I'd spoken to not long after I'd arrived in Texas. He was squinting down at me, his face a mix of concern and confusion. "You need help, pal," he repeated, and I tried to answer but only got a mouthful of dust. I coughed, clearing my throat, and finally managed to croak a response. No, I'm not okay." "No sign of a break-in," Wheeler called over his shoulder. Another officer stepped out of the museum behind him. "Someone attack?" Wheeler asked. "Who was it? Crackhead?" "Sheriff told you it was a bad idea to stay out here all alone." "We gotta get out of here," I muttered, panic seizing my chest again. The deputy, standing nearby, unbuckled his holster, though he didn't seem alarmed. "Don't you worry. You're safe now," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "Rifle through all your things," the second officer added, stepping closer. "We'll need you to come look and see if anything's missing." No. I scrambled to my feet, my voice shaking with urgency. "No. We gotta go. We gotta leave. Take me to the airport." "Calm down now," Wheeler said, his voice steady as he exchanged a look with the other men. "You ain't even got your passport. Why don't we go inside, take a moment, maybe let us get a statement? Besides, Taylor and Keen here have done a thorough sweep of the place, right?" "Yup," the other man, Taylor, said with a grin, but it did nothing to ease the cold panic gnawing at me. "Taylor's just finishing up in that basement. Elijah sure was a funny fella hiding all that down there." No, I stammered, moving toward the parking lot. "We gotta leave now. There's something. Planning on walking out of here?" Wheeler's hand was on my arm now, a genuine concern in his voice. "Whoever left you in the dirt smashed the hell out of your car. That thing ain't going nowhere." He gave a shrug. "Look, we'll give you a ride, but first things first, let's go inside and get a couple of your things." Dejected, I let them lead me back inside, where I made a beeline for my room. I didn't bother with much packing, just grabbed a suitcase, the bare essentials. I also took a minute to call my wife, letting her know I was alive. My failure to call her on time had led to her phoning the police. I don't know how things would have gone without her intervention. I was grateful for her, more than I could say. All I wanted now was to get back to her, to leave this nightmare behind me. Once I was packed, I rushed downstairs. Wheeler was waiting, ready to head into Elijah's office. "Keen went to get Taylor a short while ago," Wheeler said, sounding irritated. "Getting tired of waiting. You just stay here while I go round them up." Before I could beg him not to, he stepped inside. I followed, but I was too late. By the time I reached the stairs, his flashlight was already fading into the darkness. With him went the keys to the only working car on the property. I had no choice but to follow. As soon as I stepped onto the stairs, I felt it, that feeling again. It wasn't just fear, it was a hum in the air, a pulse, like the whole place was vibrating, alive in a way it shouldn't be. The world seemed to constrict around me. The air grew thick and suffocating. Sound felt muffled, yet everything was louder at once. My footsteps were silent, but my breath was thunder in my ears. By the time I reached the bottom, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. It was already too late to turn back. I froze when I saw it. The great metal door was wide open. No sign of Wheeler or the other officers. A pool of formaldehyde spread across the floor, mingling slowly with fresh blood, though I couldn't tell who it belonged to. The tanks were still intact, thankfully, but the chaos that surrounded me told me something terrible had just happened. The lights I'd set up were knocked over, casting long, grotesque shadows on the walls. Wheeler couldn't have been more than a few seconds ahead of me. Yet he was gone. I knew then. Every question in my mind pointed to one place. Where had the men gone? What had caused the chaos, the violence, the madness that I could scarcely understand? Why were my ears still ringing? Why couldn't I stop my feet from moving of their own accord? What had Elijah found in that wilderness? What had changed those animals, twisted them into something else? What had spoken to me through the foot-thick steel door, that force on the other side? And why, now, could I not resist the pull of that strange, corpulent mist rolling from the black abyss, beckoning me deeper into the earth? The answer to all of those questions was the same. It was all because of the force that lived on the other side of that door. It must have affected the policeman the same way it had affected me. I was only halfway across the room when it felt as though the ground was opening up beneath me. The vault door loomed ahead, and before I could think, I was crossing the threshold, feeling time and self slip away from me. God knows what it had been like for Elijah all those years ago, wandering the wilderness. Whatever he'd found, whatever had changed him, I still couldn't comprehend. He must have been naive to think it was anything divine. Even now, fragments of my journey downward echoed in my mind, like snapshots in the dark. I remember the heat and the light, the way the air felt alive. I remember pale mists curling around my feet, illuminated by some impossible glow. I wandered through vast caves, larger than any stadium, their walls stretching beyond sight. But most of all, I remember the air. It crackled with a skittish electricity, like the world itself was charged, alive with some hidden energy. It was on my skin, a gentle burn, like the sun had kissed me too long. There were buildings down there, monumental and strange. I went deeper into the cave, the mist growing thicker, glowing brighter until it felt like day instead of night. And it was in one of those buildings that I found my grandfather. Or what was left of him, at least. Of course, I say found, but he was still alive. He made noises, groans, weak sounds that proved he wasn't dead. The building was enormous, so large that even Elijah, who had grown beyond belief, took up nearly a third of it. He was taller, as he had always dreamed, and likely longer lived too, though I doubted that Cave's strange influence had made him divine. No, the sight of him made me think of the elephant's foot in Chernobyl, a slow-motion breakdown, something horrifyingly unnatural. Something, had pinned him in place, tying his limbs to the massive beams that held up the cavernous ceiling. There was a cruelty to it, a cold, deliberate malice that I couldn't fully grasp at the time. His flesh was scarred, burned with brands at regular intervals. If he could have spoken, I have no doubt he would have begged me to end his suffering. But by then, my mind wasn't my own. I left him there, alone in that hell, and continued wandering deeper into the mist. It wasn't me walking anymore, it was something else, pulling me, pushing me forward. I was nothing but a puppet, and the strings were drawn taut. I moved toward a force, an unshakable compulsion to follow it, to descend further into the depths, though I couldn't understand why. Hours, or maybe days passed, time lost its meaning, but eventually, I heard a voice. It was Wheeler's voice, distorted with agony. He was wailing, sobbing, and suddenly, out of the mist, he collided with me. The impact was enough to break whatever hold the cave had over us. We both staggered, stunned, as if waking from a dream, gasping for breath. We lay there for a moment, sprawled on the ground, trying to speak, trying to understand what had happened. I was the first to break the silence, weakly asking, what the hell happened? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he jumped on top of me, pressing a hand over my mouth with a frantic urgency. His wide eyes were filled with terror, and for a few seconds, he held me there in the dark, imploring me to stay quiet. And then, I heard it. The footfalls. They were heavy, too heavy. A giant, its steps reverberating through the cave. And with those footsteps came a feeling, a presence, its mind reaching out, seeking us. I couldn't describe what it was, but I saw it in my mind, a vision of a world long past. A flood. An ark. Seraphim wandering the earth, and great Tannin, Leviathan, and Behemoth. I felt the creature's contempt, a burning, seething hatred for humanity. It saw us as nothing but lesser beings, the inherited scum of the surface world. I don't know how Elijah could have mistaken this creature for something benevolent. Perhaps he had seen only what he wanted to see. Perhaps it had sensed his desperate need to believe and used that to manipulate him. God knows what would have happened if Elijah had truly managed to fill that hidden room with people, open the door, and let the thing loose. Whatever it was, it would have slaughtered them all, perhaps tenfold the victims it had already claimed. Only Elijah's foolishness, his arrogance, had saved him from falling into its trap. The creature moved away eventually. I don't know how or why it lost track of us. Its presence faded, and the spell it had cast over the cave seemed to come and go. But in that moment, I understood one thing with absolute clarity: I had to leave. Wheeler seemed to understand too. When it was safe, he let me go, and wordlessly, we began to retreat, to move back the way we came. It wasn't as long a journey back as I feared, though the passage of time remains a mystery. What I do know for certain is that leaving that place was its own brand of nightmare. The mist was so thick it almost swallowed us whole, and without the tracks we left behind in the strange wet ground, I doubt we would have found our way back. Even then, we often lost our bearings and had to spend hours retracing our steps. There were moments when we had to hide in crevices and caves, as terrible things drifted close in the fog, whether drawn by our scent or some other force, I couldn't say. But eventually, after what felt like a maddeningly slow trek upwards, we came to a familiar incline, the mist thinning almost entirely. By the time we stumbled back into the hidden room with the glass tanks, I had grown a fair bit of stubble, and the blood that had once flowed fresh was now a dark, congealed brown. I could only guess that we had been down there for 2 or 3 days, though I was thankful for the fragments of broken memories that kept the worst of it out of reach. Wheeler almost immediately made a beeline for the exit, but I grabbed him and pulled him back. "The door," I gasped, tugging at the locking wheel and trying to push it shut. Weak as I was, it took both of us straining with all our might before we managed to close it. When the mechanism clicked into place, I tried to turn and run, but something inside me gave out, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping and crying. Wheeler, though exhausted himself, placed a hand on my shoulder and pulled me back to my feet. "What the hell was your grandfather up to out here?" he moaned, his voice a mixture of disbelief and terror, as we limped toward the exit. "God knows," I muttered, feeling a strange sense of relief flood through me as I placed my foot on the first step, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in days. And then, it came. "Wake up." The voice was as clear as day, but this time there was no pain. I looked at Wheeler, expecting to find the same horror in his eyes. Sure enough, his face mirrored my own, wide-eyed and terrified. But the command didn't make sense. The voice felt distant, almost thinned, like it had weakened. I wondered if it was the distance or the door that had made it so strange. Elijah must have put the barrier there for a reason, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something about that voice was different. Before I could process it further, I heard the crash. The glass tanks shattered one by one, and Wheeler and I turned just in time to see the room flood with formaldehyde and slick, oily flesh. The smell was enough to make me gag, to recoil in horror, but then I saw them. The creatures within. God, most of them just thrashed around aimlessly. I couldn't tell what they were. Fish-like things screamed in almost human tones, rolling around in the slick water. Another creature was tearing apart its own face with a starfish-shaped hand. One was just a mess of legs twisted around a central mass. But one of them was rising to its feet. 2 yellow eyes glared back at me from the darkness, glowing with a sickly, vengeful rage. It looked almost human. Before I could react, it lunged at us, knocking us both sprawling onto the steps. I hit my head hard. For a few moments, I felt myself being dragged towards that foul liquid, strange tentacles and insect-like limbs pulling at me with terrifying strength. I remember the feeling of something hairy and chitinous brushing my cheek, a sensation so vile it yanked me back to my senses. When I looked over, Wheeler was beside me, semi-conscious, groaning. I realized, with a sickening clarity, that it was up to me to get us out of there. I kicked out violently, striking the thing that had a death grip on my leg. It was smaller than I expected, just bigger than a child, but it held me with an iron strength. The movement seemed to wake Wheeler, who, groggy but aware, started to fight back too. Together, we kicked and flailed, our strikes enraging the creature. With a hiss, it let go of me and turned toward Wheeler. It lashed out with a single swipe, and before I could blink, Wheeler's blood sprayed across the room in a torrent. His death rattle chilled me to my core, and for a brief moment, his hand fumbled at his belt. I hoped for a gun, but instead, his limp hand fell open, revealing a battered Zippo lighter and his car keys. I don't know if it was intentional, but in that instant, Wheeler saved my life. I grabbed the lighter and keys, scrambled to my feet, and ran for the steps. I didn't dare look back, not even once. I lit the Zippo and hurled it behind me, praying that the last gamble would work. Something slashed at my back, a burning pain that was quickly followed by a warm trickle down my legs. My final memory before I stumbled, hitting my head again, was of a blinding flash, a deafening lump that set my consciousness spiraling into darkness. I never recovered from my time in Elijah's museum. Most of my back was burned, and I never even made it to the car. The police found me crawling just outside as the entire place went up in flames. The plume of smoke was what caught their attention, and by the time they arrived, I was barely alive, rushed to the hospital. Wheeler's death was officially attributed to a violent attacker, likely the creature, based on the damage to his body. Taylor and Keene, though never found, were presumed victims of the same fate. As for me, I never contradicted the theory. I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud, that a crazed addict was responsible for the fire and deaths. No, there were darker things at work, things I couldn't explain. But I had my own problems. Third-degree burns over most of my back, and damage to my spine that left me with severe nerve damage. The doctors told me it would be a lifetime of work to even walk again, though I had my doubts. The museum is gone now. The explosion, the cave-in, it sealed everything in. I think, in some twisted way, that was for the best. My memories of the cave remain hazy, though I've relayed what I can. We went down, we saw things, and then we came back. The images that creature shoved into my mind. I'm still not sure how much of it was real. Elijah's theory about the cave changing humanity, about it being some kind of divine transformation. I can't bring myself to believe that. I remember him too clearly to believe that what happened to him was anything godly. And me? Well, the doctors keep scanning me. First every 6 months. Then 3. Then 1. Now they call me it almost every day. They won't tell me what's wrong. They won't tell me why my back itches like ants are crawling under my skin. Or why the last nurse who gave me a sponge bath ran out crying halfway through. A few days ago, they took me in for surgery, and when I woke up, they'd amputated something from my leg, but they wouldn't say what. I'm lucky my wife snuck this phone in. It's the only way I can communicate. I'd like to see her again, but I'm not sure I will. I've been down in that cave for too long. The last doctor who came in wore a hazmat suit. I'm pretty sure when he left, he was coughing up blood. But I know it's getting worse. And I don't have much longer.